So tonight, we're really focused on understanding the impact on child and family development for the Growing Up ACEs series. And really what we will focus on this evening is how adverse childhood experiences really impact the developing child and family, but we'll look at it from a protective factors lens, which, so if you all were expecting a 1.5 hour primer on child and family development, I do apologize in advance. But a lot of that is weaved in to our discussion this evening. So let's just get reacquainted with adverse childhood experiences. And I love this slide around pair of ACEs. And the pair of ACEs really speaks to community environments that are adverse. And so you'll notice that those are the roots, right? Because tree needs to grow up from the roots. So in an adverse community environment, you may see community disruption, you may see discrimination, lack of opportunity or economic mobility and social capital, violence, poor housing, quality, and affordability. And for the ACEs that could result from that environment, you may see maternal depression, emotional and sexual abuse, substance abuse, domestic violence, homelessness, incarceration, mental illness, physical and emotional neglect. So in all of my excitement to get started, I failed to introduce myself. So my name is Jessica Canton, and my day job is I'm the CEO of YWCA New Hampshire. We're located in Manchester, New Hampshire. I do see some of our YW sisters on the call, which is great. We're the only YW in New Hampshire, and we are part of the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. So the crisis services program for the greater Manchester area, Londonderry and Derry. And we also are home to the SNHU Center for New Americans, which houses our Amico youth program. So it's basically an after-school program and summer program for school-age children, designed specifically for refugee, New American, and immigrant children. So we were one of the first crisis centers in New Hampshire to develop a child advocate position within the crisis center. And we are also the co-developers of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Response Team, which is ACER. And if you were with me the first time, you would understand based on some of the personal stories that I've shared and some of my professional work, probably why is with me as leading the team, that we've really pivoted toward child advocacy, but that also understanding the importance of why that needs to be. We work really consistently on trying to break that cycle, break that generational trauma, break the opportunity to cultivate those adverse community environments. And so we try to do that through innovation. So last time I started off with a video, and so this time I'm just keeping tradition alive. This is a video that I love that was developed out of the Center for the Developing Child out of Harvard, one of my favorite resources when I like to nerd out on this information, and it's called Be a Brain Hero. And it really speaks to how we as adults can understand how adversity impacts the developing brain and some of the things we can do to make those differences. So let me pull it up and hopefully it will work.
What if you could take action to reduce crime, improve health and education levels, increase family incomes and state revenues, and improve the quality of life in communities throughout your state? Where would you begin? Science tells us that we may find the solutions to these complex social problems in early childhood, when the architecture of the brain begins to form. Brain architecture is built over time and shaped by experiences, starting in the earliest years of life. The most important experiences come from the environment of relationships that interact with each child: parents, extended family, and caregivers of all kinds. But serious adversity early in life can disrupt healthy brain development. Both brain architecture and behavior are increasingly difficult to change as individuals get older. So what happens early matters for a lifetime. Now imagine you can take action to improve the lives of children and the quality of life in this community. Where and when would that action be most effective? The links between policy, parenting, and brain architecture become much more clear when we can see how formative events in family and community environments affect child development. For example, policymakers want to make their communities safer, or improve children's learning, or reduce the cost of chronic health problems. A child raised in this environment may experience lower levels of stress and more opportunities for learning. That leads to sturdy brain architecture and a healthy stress response system, which prepare the child to achieve higher levels of literacy and other skills early in life, and later leads to improved school achievement and decreased dropout levels. Positive early experiences can also reduce levels of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Increased health and education levels can have positive effects across society, like reduced crime and increased income and tax revenues. Policies affect both individuals and communities, so making wise choices that support early brain development can improve health, behavior, and learning throughout life.
Pause share for a moment so I can see all of you. So what do you all, does anyone want to jump in? We're kind of a smaller group, so we can have a little bit of discussion. What do you folks think about when you see the Brain Hero video? Does it make sense? How many, well, let's do this first. How many of you were with us last month for the science behind ACEs? Okay. Couple of you. Yeah. So hopefully some of that information was able to resonate in the Brain Hero video, because if you could imagine those neural pathways that we were talking about that need to form, which get us to executive functioning, and as they mentioned, being more successful, and having a more productive life, one that is not as plagued by risk factors, like you can see that, that visual in the video. And so do you think that this is would be a difficult thing to achieve? An easy thing to achieve?
I think it would be difficult, and more of like a community approach. Seems like would be best.
Yeah, so as Eli has mentioned, it's, it really is going to take a community approach. And that is some of the work that we have started here at the YW, well, we've been doing at the YW for probably like the last 5 years. I mean, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Response Team is a good example of that. It takes the YWCA crisis advocate, a child health worker from Amoskeag Health, and a detective from the Manchester Police Department that's been trained in childhood trauma, early childhood trauma, and puts them together in a team to be responsive to the needs of our community members who've experienced trauma, whether that is domestic violence, whether that is an opioid overdose, or any other sort of significant trauma that might have a lasting, acute impact. So the Brain Hero really provides, I think, a visual for what we can achieve as a community with a few minor tweaks. And so one of the principal investigators on the original Adverse Childhood Experiences study, Dr. Robert Anna, talks about how ACEs is a public health threat. And then you have Nadine Burke, who is one of the champions of ACEs and is the Attorney General out in California, talking about how it's really about like low-hanging fruit. Like these aren't like sophisticated programs that we need to put in place, or but it's going to take an entire community to change their viewpoint on trauma and how we address it together. All right, so let me go back to sharing my screen. So tonight, and I sort of queued it up for you in the beginning, we're going to be talking about this through the lens of the 5 protective factors. And so I first became acquainted with the 5 protective factors when I was doing work for DCYF with the state of New Hampshire. I was one of the co-leads for the Strengthening Families work, which the Strengthening Families Prevention Framework was developed out of the Center for the Study of Social Policy. And I don't mean to be throwing like name dropping at you, but I'm just trying to give you context for where the information's coming from. And it was funny because I was on the Child Development Bureau team as the child care training specialist for New Hampshire. I initially started off in my educational career wanting to be a teacher, and then quickly realized during my internship that children in numbers scare me. Which the irony is I'm a teacher now, but it's like I realized it was adults that I actually wanted to teach. And so that degree work afforded me this position on the Child Development Bureau. And so it was kind of funny because I was surrounded by early care, early childhood like educators, professionals, folks with like dynamite knowledge and understanding of development. And I was a social worker on the team. And so my administrator at the time was like, this Strengthening Families project will be perfect for you because you'll get it because you have this like this understanding of families, and that's some of the work you've been doing during your career. And I was like, well, this actually feels a little bit more like home to me. So it was really fun to work on this project in New Hampshire with some of my colleagues, and I'm still proud to call my colleagues today. And so when I'm sharing this with you, I think it's because it's not something that's innovative. It's not rocket science. In most cases, this is reaffirming things that you might already be doing in your practice, whether you're doing things at a policy level or a program level, or you're more rooted in the community. But I think it's important for us to visit the protective factors because it lends credibility and importance to what we do, because I think sometimes we think what we're doing is not enough. And so the protective factors we'll discuss tonight are the 5 that the Strengthening Families Prevention Framework comprises of, and that is parental resilience, social connections, concrete support in times of need, knowledge of parenting and child development, and social and emotional competence of children. And you should write those down because I'm not gonna restate them. No, I'm just kidding. we'll go through them throughout the training. Just saying if you're awake. It is a Tuesday. All right. So learning objectives, this is just the fine print for this evening. I already talked about how we're going to learn about the 5 protective factors. We're also going to talk about strategies tonight. How do you support the healthy development of children and families who have experienced ACEs? And what are some strategies that build protective factors? I figured this would actually be much better than us revisiting Child Development and Family Development 101. So let's start off with resilience. So you see in this picture, the palm trees are like staying strong, but there's obviously some sort of weather event happening and they're blowing to the side. And, if you think about this, there might be cases where these trees could blow clear out of their roots, depending upon how strong those roots are, depending upon the age of the tree, the other weather conditions that it's faced. But a tree right next to it might stay perfectly through a storm like this. And so humans are really the same in the sense that capacity is different. The human capacity to face and overcome can be strengthened by or even transformed by the adversities of life. And so what that means is that, resilience is different for everyone, and no 2 people have the same amount of resilience. I'll often talk about how, we all know those people in our lives that, may have walked similar journeys. And one person is struggling a lot more through that journey, and another person just seems to keep pushing forward, pushing forward, pushing forward. And that really has to do with resilience. So there might have been more capacity building activities in that person that pushes forward. There has been some research that suggests that resilience might even be part of our genetic makeup. I haven't delved too much into that, but I have always been kind of curious about why some of us seem to be more resilient than others. And I think last time we were together, I shared about my story and my journey through adverse childhood experiences and my score. And then on paper, with a ACEs score of 9, which is the highest ACEs score is like 7 to 9, you would think like I should be all these things. And so what the adults in my life celebrated was that I overcame that, but nobody really celebrated that I experienced that. And it's because we still don't like to talk about these things. And so I think protective factors puts a language to building capacity in families and honoring the journey that they've walked. And so just move you all around my screen a little bit. So the first protective factor is parental resilience. Parental resilience is about being able to manage stress and functioning well when faced with challenges, adversity, and trauma. And so resilience to general life stress, what we hope that it looks like is being able to problem solve, self-care and willingness to ask for help, and ability to manage negative emotions. So while there is no typical development for any one person, right? But if you look at human development across the lifespan, at the age where you would be able to begin to have children, and I'm speaking in general terms, you would hopefully have enough problem solving skills, ability to regulate emotions, and ability to self-soothe, right? And we want this because parenting is stressful, right? I have 4 children. I could give you a whole workshop on that one, but we want that resilience to parenting stress to be built up. So we want that stress to not interfere with nurturing. We want that stress to not interfere with caregiving. We want that caregiver to have mostly a positive attitude about parenting and child. And again, like positive attitude, relative, right? We all have that day-to-day stuff. This isn't the day-to-day stuff. This is what we call like, this is good. There's the bad, which all of us can probably have gone in and out of at times, depending on our life circumstances. And then there's just the ugly. And the ugly is what really impacts long-term that development. And so for parental resilience, we name this as a protective factor because if we can build capacity and their resilience, then we can help, get them closer to those skills that we just talked about in the beginning, or fine tuning them or making them a little bit more sharp. So how do we do this as community professionals? I think it's really demonstrating in multiple ways that parents are valued. And I do want to remind you all that I did give you the disclaimer that this is not rocket science, okay? One of the things I always say, and it's something I actually stole from Head Start, is that parents are the first teacher. And then I added, even if we don't like the teaching practice. And so from a developmental perspective, that parent is at the center of that child's life, good, bad, or indifferent. And this is why we talk about the value of children of incarcerated parents being able to see their incarcerated parent even, once or twice a year. Because inherently, remember we talked about how we were wired at birth, we all want that connection with our primary, the primary caregiver from birth, right? That parent that we are expecting to give us love and care and nurturance. And in the absence of that, when that doesn't happen, it can impact development in huge ways. So we want to honor that the parent is the first teacher, and that will tell us a lot, right? And then honor each family's race and language and cultural and history and approach to parenting. And that is, honoring doesn't mean that we're going to understand it all. It doesn't mean that we have to adapt and adapt and adapt within our programs and community systems. It means that we honor that there's a difference, and we validate that. And in the absence of any kind of safety issues or abuse or neglect, we respect that that the culture of that house might be different, maybe outside of what we're used to, maybe even outside of our own values, and when it comes to parenting. We want to encourage parents to manage stress effectively, and support them as decision makers and help them build that decision making and leadership skills, and understand how to buffer their child during stressful times. And so you might be like, well, this is really challenging. I need those things for myself if you're a parent, or how do I even do this? And so you're already probably doing this in most cases, but at the heart of it is showing up, right? And so it's hearing parents out, hearing what their needs are, and allowing them the opportunity to navigate what their needs are versus applying what you think they should be doing to make the situation better for or to be a quote unquote better parent. So the building blocks of resilience, for those of you that are visual folks, starts with our skills and attitudes that we might have, right? So what are our communication skills? What are our own coping strategies? What is our belief system? What is our level of ability to have hope in those that we're supporting, right? And so we really need to look inward, because this is difficult work. I mean, at its core, it's challenging a lot of your beliefs and your values about some of the most vulnerable citizens in our communities, which is children. And then what's that internal inventory? What challenges do I need to recognize? What feelings do I need to acknowledge? And how can I problem solve through those? And then preparing for action. What resources do you have to offer? So this isn't about wearing a superhero cape and making decisions or doing for. It's about providing opportunities to build capacity, because that's what protective factors do, is they build capacity in individuals and families, and then taking action. So then on the other side of that, we would, and in turn, what we call this like parallel process, is we would then be building on the parents' strengths, supporting their skill building, reinforcing those actions, and taking action. So by doing, we're able to offer that experience to the parent, so that they can begin to offer that experience to their children, and they can begin to offer that experience in the community places and spaces that they hold. So the thing that I like to chat about when it comes to parental resilience is that it's important to understand that, and I've spent a lot of time focusing my training a lot on early childhood teachers because of my former role. But now it's extended to my students in the classroom. I'm also teach at SNHU. And I think that one of the things that we have to, it's like this notion of grace, right? It's understanding your communication style and understanding that person's communication style, which is born out of their experiences and prior relationships. So the parents that we are trying to support that have experienced, that are going through these things right now, probably most likely have their own trauma history. They may have co-occurring issues like domestic violence and substance misuse that we're not even aware of. They may feel negative about themselves. They may worry that if they admit that they need support in parenting, that's going to somehow reflect on them as not a good parent or not having it together. They might also be parenting children who've already experienced trauma. So this may not be the first time this has happened. I apologize for the background noise. I work in downtown Manchester, so it is a menagerie of sounds at any given time. Like that was the motorcycles, before that was the church bells. So also maybe parenting children with special needs, and they could also be worried about what could happen to their child in a hostile environment. So what our role is to project a positive and strengths-based approach to the family. So we do this a lot in domestic violence work. We put the survivor at the center, and it can be challenging because it can be a long process that requires a lot of patience, but we wouldn't have it any other way. Because when you put the person at the center, you're truly honoring where they're at, and you're giving them an opportunity to make decisions that will, you know, I think in most cases will have a much longer lasting ability to build capacity and the changes that they want. I mean, they'll be able to sustain them much longer because they charted their path. And then again, we go back to that supporting family as key decision makers. It's also important to normalize that parenting is stressful, and support parents during stressful parenting situations. When we do that through validation and empathy, and then also just acknowledging, depending upon what that family has gone through, maybe where they're living, maybe of other social constructs, like what are some trends that are happening that might make it even more stressful. And so we can do that in a variety of ways. We can do that through policy development. We can do that through our approaches to work with individuals. We can do that through creating community programs that are inclusive. And so those, in a sense, are all developmentally appropriate. So the second protective factor we're going to talk about this evening is social connections. And those, after this, we'll come back and we'll have a chat for anyone that has any questions or discussion points. But social connections as a protective factor is about having that opportunity to engage in positive relationships that provide emotional, instrumental, informational, spiritual support, meaning that people feel connected in their community. They feel connected, they have supportive relationships with other people. Oftentimes when people are experiencing a high level of trauma, a high level of adversity, they feel very isolated, they feel very alone, and they also struggle to feel respected and appreciated. And social connections allows for that. And why it's an important part of development is because we are essentially social creatures. We're craving connection. We need human connection to develop and grow and thrive. And that comes from developing skills like empathy, but also receiving empathy from others. It comes from validation from others. And for families and children who've experienced a lot of adversity, this kind of thing can often take a back seat, because there can be, it sometimes be a lot of secrecy and shame tied up in those experiences. And so that's why social connections is a protective factor. Because if you have your person that you can go to, and we all, if like I asked you all right now, like, who's your person? Like the one person that if something happened, that you think automatically, like, I can't wait to call so-and-so or talk to so-and-so and tell them about what happened. That is a social connection at its essence, right? And a lot of times for these families that we may be working with, their social connections might be strained because of a lot of the dynamics we've been discussing. And so provided opportunities to either develop some new social connections or work through some of the barriers that are challenging them to connect meaningfully with people, that can really make all the difference. And so we do this through creating an inclusive environment. We see that popping up again. Facilitating mutual support. And so facilitating mutual support does not look like you being their social connection, right? You all are concrete support in times of need. You all are a resource for the families and children you're serving, you're educating, you're working with, you're supporting, whatever verb you need, right? But you can't be their everything, their social connection, because a protective factor at its truest form is about building capacity in someone. And you do this through promoting engagement in the community and participation in community activities. You provide opportunities for families to engage with one another in a safe environment. And so this could look like any number of different things, right? This could look like sharing information on a social media page about free or low cost events. This could look like something we do, which is like once a quarter, so like once every 3 to 4 months, we host, well, prior to the pandemic, family fun night. And so this is open to everyone in the community, not just the clients that we're supporting. And we have like pizza and ice cream and games, and you know, it looks different for every option. And then we also have other things like groups and classes. But I think Social Connections allows folks to feel like they're part of a community, so that, you know, that they're not so alone. Because going through these kinds of things can make you feel pretty isolated. So it's almost sort of like a relearning, right? Because as I mentioned, oftentimes for folks that have experienced a lot of adversity, their relationships can be strained. It can be challenging to navigate relationships because of, you know, how they've been treated in the past or hurt in the past. And they might be mistrustful of systems that are meant to support them because of prior experiences. And so what this allows, when we have these sort of natural supports in place and we value these social connections and create these inclusive environments, is we slowly start to chip away at their wall that's been built up, and hopefully provide an opportunity for them to navigate it and how they need to. But we are essentially building skills and giving them the opportunity to accept help from others and giving help to others, right? So here's a role you can play in your community. This is something you can bring to this event, or this is how we want you to participate and show up. And for some people, this looks like a community event. The faith-based community is, I think, a really overlooked value add in something like this, because that can be a great support system for folks that like to engage that way. Or, you know, programming at organizations like ours are also ways to get at this. But we can't underestimate, from a developmental perspective, the importance of relationships, which is essentially social connection. So we need to understand how to help families value, build, sustain, and use those connections if they are struggling. And so one of the videos I want to show you now is about how what does this look like? You know, how children and adults can build core capabilities for life. So we click on this. We've had good luck with technology so far. We'll watch the video.
Building core capabilities for life. Every day we take on the ordinary, sometimes challenging tasks of work, school, parenting, relationships, and just managing our busy lives. How do we navigate these tasks successfully? And what can send us off course? Science offers an explanation. We all need a set of core capabilities that we can develop with practice over time. Scientists call them executive function or self-regulation skills, and they help us to focus on what's important, to plan ahead, set goals, and meet them. They help us deal with whatever life throws at us and can build them. We build them through a lifetime of making connections within and among the regions of the brain. Our brains begin life with billions of neurons, rapidly connecting to each other as we experience the world around us, making trillions of connections in just a few years. Early simple circuits form a foundation that more complex circuits and skills build on as we grow and have new experiences. These complex circuits, built throughout childhood and reaching across vast regions of the brain, make our core capabilities possible. The more we use these connections, the stronger and faster they become. That's why practice is so important. When we are children, we practice these skills by playing games, learning teamwork, adjusting to new rules. We continue to develop these skills in adolescence by managing school and other things like work, sports, music, and relationships. When we practice executive function skills, circuits rapidly connect the prefrontal cortex to other parts of the brain. These circuits act like an air traffic control system in the brain. They manage incoming information and help us respond with intention, not on impulse. Threatening or stressful experiences activate different circuits, and those trigger automatic responses: fight, flight, or freeze. We need automatic responses for survival, but if stress is constant, these automatic fight or flight circuits become stronger and faster than our more productive intentional circuits, the ones we use for executive function and self-regulation. For anyone under stress, it's hard to call on intentional skills. If we've been experiencing serious stress from our earliest years, the stress caused by poverty, violence, or addiction, a chaotic environment, it's even harder. Under lots of stress every day, it's harder still. The key is counterbalancing those automatic responses by building up our intentional ones, by building strong executive function skills. The good news is these core capabilities can be strengthened. How? By redesigning our systems so they reduce the sources of stress in people's lives, by simplifying how services are provided to families, helping them meet basic needs and building on strengths, because small successes lead to bigger ones. With less stress, we can practice the skills we already have and build new circuits for the intentional responses we need. Stronger brain circuits are built through practice in situations that matter. That's true for children, it's true for adolescents, and it's true for adults. Helping children build skills gives them a strong foundation for all that comes later. Helping teens build their skills propels them into greater success as adults and parents. And helping adult caregivers build their core capabilities ensures success at work, stable homes, and responsive relationships for the next generation. When our communities work together to help children and adults build these skills, we create a positive cycle as one generation passes them on to the next. And that helps us all.
You might all hear they're playing soccer in the gym right now. Christine asked if I'll be sharing the presentation after. It should have been emailed out, but yeah, I'll definitely send it out to you, Christine. So in the adult core capabilities for life, thinking about the air traffic control analogy with the executive functioning, what are your thoughts on how some of the protective factors we've been discussing tonight could make that those experience, like building up those protective factors, could support like healthier brain functioning for children? Or just what are your thoughts in general? I'm like, I've either lulled you to sleep or you're like you're so stumped that you're like. That's okay. Not everybody is an extrovert like me.
Well, you know, I don't want to leave you like totally hanging out there, Jessica, with nobody saying nothing. So, because that's awkward. One of the things, and this is not an answer to your question, but the idea of the fight, flight, or freeze, and all of the, you know, these situations that you can find yourself in, and when it happens over and over and over again, I've always kind of pictured like the brain as sitting in this sort of toxic soup, and it's sort of absorbing all of this soupy substance into the gray matter. And if the soup is like, you know, nasty, which is toxic experiences, then your default mode becomes that, you know, sort of whatever your reaction is, fight or flight or freeze. And that takes over when there's a triggering kind of an experience. So I just like the graphics in the movie and how it sort of displayed that a little bit. I'm not sure that's my contribution, so you don't feel so awkward all by yourself.
Limiting my awkwardness because it happens very frequently.
Yeah, it happens to me too. So I'm with you, man.
But I do love the flight or freeze, and sort of the illustration that you pictured around the brain sort of sitting in a toxic soup, because the other analogy that I share is there's a cartoon out there and it's a dog sitting on like the proverbial psychiatrist couch, and the psychiatrist is like looking at him and he's like, oh, I bark at everything, I can't go wrong that way. And that at its core is sort of a trauma response, right? Because when you're always stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze, eventually one of those takes over. And what that means is that that's the danger in this continual exposure to adversity and your stress response system always being tripped up, is that it becomes your normal, and it can make it really difficult, as I was sharing earlier, to navigate relationships, build those social connections. Thank you. Other thoughts? All right, let's keep going. All right. So this one, not so exciting, but is my favorite, one of my favorite protective factors in knowledge of parenting and child development. So I always talk about how, you know, in this world, and we need, you know, certifications, licensures to do most important things. And parenting is the one thing that we really just sort of comes naturally. And I'm not suggesting we license it or regulate it. I didn't say that. But what I'm saying is that, you know, when we talk about concepts like generational trauma and parents having their own trauma history, sometimes that can get really like, can be passed on to the child. And so having an understanding of parenting and child development, what does nurturing parenting behavior look like? Because maybe I was never nurtured. I was never nurtured as a young child. So it was really challenging for me. And I always joke around, and there's actually a meme out there that says, how did you get your sense of humor? And it's like unresolved childhood trauma. And I laugh, but that's actually where it sort of comes from, because humor and sarcasm has kind of become a mechanism for me to navigate situations. And, you know, nurturing parent behavior, when you've never experienced that, it's really hard to think about like, well, how am I supposed to apply this in everyday life? How am I supposed to apply this to my child? And so my children, 4 of them, are a progression of, you know, my healing. I think I chatted about that last time. And so it's also about having appropriate developmental expectations. I do see oftentimes a lot of adults, professional or not professional, educators or not educators, you know, really struggling to have appropriate developmental expectations of children. We really enjoy adultifying children. And that's why that piece on executive functioning in the last video we watched is important, because children are not little adults. Children under the age of 8 to 10, depending on where they're at developmentally, do not have the ability to logic and reason. What we're seeing is modeling. So we're seeing them giving back what they've received so far in their world and testing it out to see how it works. And so we as adults have a responsibility to think about, like, well, and not think of them as little adults, think of them as children. And so again, this is kind of a behavior I think that gets passed on can get passed on from generation to generation. Because if you think about it, at the origin of it, when you hear people talk about their childhood, and whether it be positive or negative, there are things that they drew from their family of origin that stayed with them, and that's either good or that's bad, right? And so we need passing this information on to parents through, programming, policy development, community strategies is a promising thing for us to think about, because we can't assume that all parents have this information just because they're parents. And this comes about recognizing and responding to your child's specific needs. And so this isn't telling people, you really need to learn more about parenting and child development. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what it comes in the form of is like programs, for example, like ACER, the program I was discussing earlier. This is at its heart us showing up for those families and saying, we know that you've experienced this trauma. Here's some resources available to you, some referral programs, and then, beginning to have a dialogue with them about how trauma might impact their child, because it might not even occur to them consciously that, because we've lived for so long with this notion that children are resilient and they don't understand what's going on. And the reality is even though they don't have the language to articulate what's happened in their worlds, they know, like we know, because we all have intuition, when something is off, not right, not safe. And so giving parents this information can be huge. And that's why I think we're looking at programming in Manchester, like around home visiting opportunities for everybody, not just the families that are at risk, right? That, potentially families with new infants could have an opportunity their first, few weeks at home to be visited by someone that says, hey, you're part of our community. Here's some resources that might be helpful to you. And there's been tremendous research around how those connections can be so invaluable. And this really isn't I understand that socioeconomic status definitely is a risk factor, and it creates an environment where adversity can live, right? But this is all families. This isn't just those families. Every family, it can be, vulnerable to these kind of risk factors. I mean, my own biological mother grew up, and for all intents and purposes, in a middle-class family in suburban Missouri. Like, picture perfect family from the outside, but what was happening inside, would create this ripple effect across generations of children. And, at the heart of all us as a family, there's, unconditional love and support, my aunts and uncles, but there's a lot of dysfunction. And so I always sort of point that out, because it's probably my own personal experience, but two, my adoptive family we're very low income, poor, at points on, food stamps, back when it was called food stamps, rental assistance, had to apply for town welfare on multiple occasions. But that family was more responsive developmentally. And so I share that because there's a lot of assumptions we make to navigate our environment. And I think this is information that could be good for all families. And through everyday actions, the first one, unless you're probably in a classroom or program environment, it might be a little bit challenging to do. modeling developmentally appropriate interactions with children. This gets back to that parallel process that I was discussing earlier, where if we teach children some of these protective factors and engage with them in a developmental appropriate manner, remember they like to model, so inevitably they may go home and some of this might begin to rub off there. Encourage parents through sharing of information. We talked about creating an inclusive environment. And then addressing parenting issues from a strengths-based perspective. I mean, this is challenging work. I think it's often more easy for us to default to, well, let's just provide assistance, let's just provide support. And so one of the things that we've really tried hard to do in the Amico Youth Program through our Center for New Americans here at the YW is like to really build relationships with those families. But that takes resources, right? But that is one of the unique qualities of our programming, is that we're able to build relationships with the families in our programs and ask them, what do you need? And what are some of the challenges for your children to participate in this program? For example, there's some cultural beliefs around girls attending a program like a after school program, because that's not always something that those families are really excited about because of any number of different things, values and beliefs. And so we've had to do a lot of work with those families to share with them like how the girls coming will improve their school. They may not, that it's just girls only programming. So we try whenever possible, as I was just as we were talking about earlier, to be inclusive, to be culturally responsive. And it's an ongoing journey. We learn something new like every day. So the next protective factor we're going to discuss tonight is concrete supports in times of need. And this is about providing access, not doing for. And we provide these supports and services when we address families' needs and help minimize the stress caused by those challenges. And so what this looks like in an ideal form is seeking and receiving support when needed, knowing what services are available and how to access them. I'm going to run through them and then I'll do my commentary. Adequate financial security, right? Basic needs met, persistence, and being able to advocate for yourself. Well, out of those 5 bullets, I could probably think of 4 to 5 barriers in my own community that would make it impossible to achieve that ideally. And so it's easy to throw this up on a PowerPoint and be like, this is what concrete supports in times of need looks like, ideally, because we want to talk about what we strive for, right? But the reality is, like, I'll just pick at basic needs being met right now. Housing, we're in New Hampshire, and I know the rest of the country is experiencing this too, but our housing is like, I think we're at less than 1% vacancy rate in Manchester right now. And if there is a vacancy, there's 10 to 12 applicants for that housing. We're in desperate need of affordable housing that the workforce can access. And so it's easy to say, oh, basic needs being met, check, check. But the reality is that pair of aces we talked about, that adverse community environment that can sometimes impact that from coming forward. Knowing the services that are out there. The services are always changing because the funding is always changing. And so we have to work hard together, collectively, collaboratively, to ensure sustainability. And, if that program changes a little bit, making sure that the heart of it is still in place, and those are some of the things that we've done with our Reach Crisis Services program, for example. I mean, we've been doing crisis services in New Hampshire since 1977. Might be the year I was born, but it's definitely evolved over time, and it's definitely changed over time depending upon the resources that were available. But that's an established program in the community. Folks know they can come to us and get advocacy services and other resources. but we're dependent on getting resources to run that program. So for example, we have a housing program. Actually, Lorinda is on the call tonight with us. She runs our housing program for us. And there are some years where we run out of flexible funds in our housing program. And so these are important considerations to think about as us as professionals in helping families navigate these supports. And that's where that advocacy piece comes in. That's where the persistence comes in, and looking to those sources of support and not doing for families, which I've seen some professionals, especially, you know, early on in my career, I always tell people, I'm like, I want to call the families I worked with and apologize. Not because I was a horrible human being, but because I thought I had to have all the answers and save the day. And that was really not at all what they needed. They didn't need to just listen and hear them out and validate them. So how we can do this, though, is respond immediately when families are in crisis. And immediately might look different for everyone, but, you know, just showing up is enough, right? It's the simple things that we don't lend a lot of weight to. But for some folks you may be working with, like, you may be the only person that showed up for them this week. Providing information and connections to services in the community. You know, that gets back to the heart of what I really like, this collaborative approach, that like not one person can do all of this work, right? So if a client comes to us and they were like, oh, I really want my child to, you know, I'm just throwing this out there as a random one. I really want my child to be able to access swimming lessons in the community. Then I know I can call up the Granite YMCA and they have agreement with us and they'll be able to provide it either discounted or free. Or, you know, someone comes to us and says, I really need my child to be in some sort of grief program, right? Christine Phillips is on the call tonight. I would probably call up her program and say, hey, I have this child. So it's not about one group, one organization, one person doing everything. It's accessing the resources in the community. And that's really how we help families to develop skills and tools. I think in my world sometimes, and I don't know how it is for all of you, but I take for granted a lot that the information I know, everyone knows, in the sense of like what's going on in the community and what resources there are, and that's really not the case. I think people don't often understand the depth of what's available to them in terms of support and service. Someone sent a message. Okay. All right. So, that was the duplicate slide. How did we go back? All right. So Mike had to go. So one of you other folks will be tasked with not making me feel awkward. So really what we're trying to do is build a bridge to services, and you know, you have your bridge. We want to be the bridge. We want to be the bridge keeper, if you will. I won't say troll because that's not a very pleasant word, but you know, some trolls are cute. But we want to be providing that pathway and not feeling like we have to solve it all or fix it all. And it's really the best way to show empathy. It's the best way to show validation. And it really is the way that we can provide the most amount of supports, and whatever that support looks like. And it's going to be different for everyone. You know, nobody that shows up in, no child that comes to the Amico Youth Program, no individual that shows up to our crisis program has the same exact need, you know, and that's why we try whenever possible within our means to treat them as much as possible, you know, as the individual that they are, obviously within limitations. So the next protective factor is the social and emotional competence of children. Probably one of my favorite ones, aside from the knowledge of parenting and child development, because, you know, I think this really just resonates with me because of my own values and beliefs. You know, social and emotional competence for children creates socially and emotionally competent adults. you're probably thinking to yourself, like, I know some adults right now that could be more socially and emotionally competent, right? And so if we really arm children with the language and the information that they need to develop as optimally as they can in this area, we are providing them with, the tools for success, right? And this really comes to that unconditional and positive regard, modeling, nurturing care, helping them to develop a positive identity and interact in a diverse society, respond proactively when social and emotional development needs extra support. And this can come in many different forms. I mean, over the course of the last year, we've done the outreach through the Amico Youth Program. We've responded to the needs of survivors and their children for safe housing. That's a form of nurturance. We have held youth listening sessions around some of the struggles that our country has been facing with racism and continued racial justice issues. And so these are all geared at, developing, that socially emotionally competent children, because that's what those are the children that hopefully will become socially emotionally competent adults. And we don't come wired with this. We gather it from, remember, our experiences and our relationships. And so even if we don't see the direct results of some of the work that we're doing, it will have a more positive impact later on in our communities and our classrooms and our programs. So what does this look like for a parent to foster this in children? It looks like those warm and consistent responses that foster a strong and secure attachment. It looks like good social skills and setting limits. And for the child, we know they're on track with this when they're able to self-regulate, which is, to calm themselves down within a reasonable amount of time. They're able to form relationships. They're having positive interactions with others. They're able to effectively communicate developmentally appropriate wise. We can expect a toddler to talk like a 30-year-old, but why is this so important? I think it's important for a number of reasons, but we obviously want to get at all of those risk factors that adversity can create. Remember we were discussing the longer term impacts of ACEs. So children with a strong foundation and emotional vocabulary can tolerate frustration better, get into fewer disagreements, engage in less destructive behavior. Those at-risk behaviors that we talked about, ACEs made children vulnerable to. Impulsivity rates are low. They can become more focused and have, greater, hopefully, academic achievements, which will provide a pathway to success. And, it's not that I don't care about them being healthier or less lonely. I just didn't want to go through the bullet list of the sentence so you guys can read the screen. So for those of you that are visual, we build these skills through first, recognizing and communicating, teaching them to recognize and communicate their emotions. So what does this emotion look like? And then the fact that this idea that emotions come and go, that they don't stay in place. And then that, once they have that power and that control over their language, they can develop that control, that response to their feelings. And that comes over time, and then develop strategies. And that all leads to empathy. You need all of those skills to be able to empathize with someone and to be able to understand their experience, even if you don't have the same experience or you don't agree with it. And so for bringing it all home, what does building protective factors look like? It looks like us expressing empathy, right? Remember I told you this was not rocket science or complicated. Asking good questions, providing information and perspective, right? Helping to develop strategies, whatever that may look like, whether you're strategizing about accessing affordable childcare or you're strategizing about what are some housing resources, but you're supporting that family, that individual, that child to be able to succeed on their own. And then it also looks like coaching, modeling, and mentor, because I think we all really need someone in our corner kind of cheering us on, but that's not the social connection that I was talking about. Like, you're not that person's go-to person. You can support them and not be that person. And then lifting up successes. I think successes are important to celebrate. I don't think we always do a really great job of celebrating successes, but it's important to celebrate the little things. So one of the things I like to do from time to time is, let me see if I can move you all around, is that I like to, I don't know if I talked to you all about Brene Brown last time, but I love her podcasts. And today I listened to one with her and Michael Bungay Stanier, and I probably butchered his last name. And it was on avoiding giving advice, but becoming more curious. And I was like, I don't know how many of you are notorious advice givers. I think it's a trait of folks in our field that we love to give advice, right? And so I was like, wow, I was like, I wonder what this looks like, right? And so he was discussing how this in a coaching context. But I was like, I was thinking about our discussion later tonight. I was like, this is really kind of applicable, I think, to what we're discussing tonight when we're talking about strategies. Is I don't often know the questions to ask families when I'm trying to support them. In fact, because I don't work with families so directly anymore, my go-to is usually just to fix it right away. I'm like, okay, what do you need, right? And so I liked this idea of becoming more curious, which is another sort of takeoff from this idea of living the questions, right? And so he gave the 7 questions, right? So what's on your mind? I don't know why, but when someone says to me, what's on your mind? I feel like they're really interested in what I have going on. Like what's on your mind? They're not asking me how I am, which is a very standard one, right? They're asking me, what am I thinking, right? And then they tell you, and you say, and what else, right? Because the natural progression when someone asks you what's on your mind is, if it is something that requires advice, is that we launch into our advice, right? And so, and what else suggests that you're open to a dialogue about their experience. What else are they experiencing? And I would probably tweak this one a little bit. What's the real challenge here for you? But what I like about the concept of this question is, as a strategy for our work with families, is that we're really asking, what is the most important thing to you right now? And it kind of brought me back to my days in the field with clients, and clients would come to me and they would have a whole host of risk factors occurring at once. They were unemployed, were experiencing housing issues, childcare issues, transportation issues. And one of my questions to them would always be, so out of everything that's going on right now, you can't take it all on at once. What is the most important thing to you? And so that's maybe how I would reframe it. What is the most important thing to you that gets fixed right now? And then what do you want? And what do you want? I think we avoid this question like the plague because we're scared of the answer. We're afraid that if they give an answer and we can't offer it, then what? We're failing them, right? But what do you want is also very empowering, because it doesn't necessarily denote that we have to have, it's not a contract, right? It's us saying, well, what do you want? What's, a lot linked to what's the real challenge here for you? Let me just check the chat real quick. Okay, you're welcome, Julie. Yeah, lost her A on the end of her name. And then how can I help? And if you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? Again, probably wouldn't frame it in that way, but I would think about this question too, is that you're sort of reinforcing some of the protective factors we talked to tonight about this notion of there are choices, there have to be choices, and not everything is going to be achieved at once. And what is the most useful to you? So what is a resource that is going to be really helpful to you right now? I mean, I kind of threw this in here last minute because I listened to this podcast and it just reminded me a lot of like what I thought would be important to share tonight about, how can we get at these strategies that we need to develop to work with children and families. And so we are already at questions. I can't believe that.
There are so many times when we get requests for assistance that are just exactly like you said. So I'm sorry, everyone already knows this, but just a myriad of problems, the fundamental one being housing and the panic, and also the fact that we're not, so I'm the United Way as well, we're not a direct service organization, we're a referral organization. We're about building the safety net. So we have to refer people out, which feels terrible. It feels like we're not saying we can be a part of their solution. We have to point them in the right direction and hope that they take us up on those suggestions, and hope that if they do, that people actually pick up the phone and have a conversation with them. And that it's even a good referral, because we don't know much. So that is in our role as being a part of helping to make the sea less turbulent. Do you have any suggestions perhaps about, or does anyone here have any suggestions about how we can make the sea a little bit more still so people can, because I can listen and I can do my best there, but I can't do much more than that. And that hurts a lot. I know that's pretty obvious.
No, and it is obvious, and I appreciate you sharing that example, because I think I don't want to leave anyone out. So Eli and Lorinda are here tonight from our crisis program that I've been referencing, and I'm actually going to put them on the spot because I think this is something that we run into a lot because of the specialized nature of the work that we do. And it is really heartbreaking for them when they have to say to someone, unfortunately, like, you don't qualify for this, or we've run out of this resource, or have you tried this instead, because it doesn't quite fit into what our funding will pay for.
For me, it can, I've been really frustrated like that before also. But also, like, it helps sometimes if you try to like change the way that you think about it, instead of that, like, you're not providing services, you're like giving referrals, instead of looking at it like you're giving them these resources and information that they didn't have before. And especially with the clients that we deal with, they're most of the time people that didn't have any kind of power to make choices for themselves. So you're giving them like all this information so that they can start becoming empowered to like make choices for themselves. So I just kind of like reframed the way I was looking at it, instead of like, I'm not really doing that much, and so like looking at it in a different perspective, I guess. But I felt the same way that you do.
I think also feeling like, just to piggyback off of what Lorinda said, feeling like you're part of a community, or part of whatever, however you want to think about it, and you're doing your part to help, whatever your capacity is to help. And then someone else is gonna, so you're putting your part in. So that should make you feel good that you're there. And a lot of times listening is the number one thing that people need, is just to hear that compassionate voice on the other end of the phone, and to know that you're there, and that, yeah, you're introducing them to something they don't know about.
Thank you both. I love the idea of empowering them and being a part of the solution, and not feeling like I have to be the like quarterback for the solution or something like that.
Yeah, that's why I didn't give you any advice, because lately all I'm good at is being the quarterback, and it gets me into hot water with my staff sometimes, because they're like, you're not allowed to talk to anybody anymore. Uh, so yes, Leanne.
So I'm here in a different capacity. I am a survivor of severe ACEs from childhood to severe domestic violence, rape, and otherwise. And to be on the other side and to tell or say how it feels to be on that side to people that are helping us. I will say I've gone from Tennessee to New Hampshire, and in New Hampshire, there's more concern on mental illness and such, whereas when I was in Tennessee, it was not. I think you're right, Sam, that people, and is it Eli? Sometimes we want somebody to talk to that is not in our situation. That is, sorry about the screaming kids in the background. My husband's trying to corral them. But the talking and getting it out and not suppressing it. I did a lot of pushing stuff under the rug. I'm in my mid 40s now, and this has been going on since my 20s. So it's been 20 years, and my husband and children have been wonderful because sometimes something triggers. The triggers never go away. But yes, listen to people. I was given no housing, no food, no nothing. I was homeless. I had my car and I lived in my car. But now I'm taking classes like this because when I have a friend who says, this is happening to my kid, well, maybe you need to have your kid talk to somebody because they're just going to hold it in under that rug. And it's just going to stay there and fester until you talk about it. And I've been, all my kids are special needs, and I take classes and I'm trying to help other people, but you can't always give the person the answer they want. Money isn't going to solve everything. And sometimes they just want you to solve their problems. And then once you solve their problems, they come up with a new set. So it has to be a 50-50 in my opinion, because I didn't get anything handed to me and I'm a fighter now. So I fight for my children. I fight for my husband. I fight for what's right and what's wrong. I help my friends. So don't just give it to everybody, but be there. A set of ears is awesome, especially when no one has family. I have no family here. So.
Leanne, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really important perspective in the sense of understanding, how you can transcend along your journey from, and that's sort of like a similar path that I walked, is like, how can I turn these things that happened to me into, positive experience for other people and educate people on this. Because once I learned about ACEs, it was like life altering for me. And I think I shared that all with you last time. So ever since, it's like, I just want everyone to know about ACEs and how important it is to know about all that. Other questions, thoughts? Christine, is there something going on with Friends of Anya that I don't want to put you on the spot, but I just did. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you do with children and families who experienced?
Yeah, I will. Thank you. And I don't mind being on the spot with you at all. So thank you. And I want to say thanks for this presentation. So I'm Christine Phillips. I'm the executive director for the Friends of Anya Center for Grieving Children and Families. So our kiddos come to us and their caregivers come to us because of a death of someone important in their lives. So we look at that as, that's an opportunity for us not only to help them through their grief, but the tools that we try to share with them are very similar to what Jessica is talking about, and that we're trying to empower them so that they can go forward and we hope make better choices for themselves later. To let them know that their grief doesn't define them, and that their circumstances, although the hardest they may be in, they can have hope that things can be different moving forward. And we use peer-to-peer support groups to do this. And I think that for me personally, that model is not that I don't think one-on-one therapy and counseling is good, because I think those are excellent. And I think they can go hand in hand nicely with a peer-to-peer support group. But the minute we put these kids who are feeling the same, who don't know they're feeling the same, in a group together, there's an instant change in their demeanor. There's an instant physical change. I mean, you literally can see weight fall off them, and they are so happy to be in a room full of kids who get how they understand. And I think that's the most powerful thing about it. The other piece is making sure that I love the piece, Jessica, that you were pointing out about giving them the language, because a lot of our kids don't have any words for how they're feeling. They don't even understand death and the concept of that. And so we work really hard with them to identify how they might feel. And we use terms, we use the language that is real. We don't necessarily say, I'm so sorry you lost your dad. Because a 5-year-old thinks that a loss is something that can be found. And we're trying to help them understand that, that this is a concrete thing. So, I really applaud the work that Jessica's doing. And we are also a member of ACERT as a referral agency, which is a very exciting role for us. We're so glad to be part of the community and to be collaborating with great service organizations like YW and Waypoint and MSK Health, and it's just it's a collective group trying to help the kids, and I think that it's so important because we cannot do it alone. They come to us with grief, but they're going to need YW for something else, or they're going to need Waypoint for something else. So we have what we call a resource ring that we give to the schools, and eventually we'll give to our family, that says, hey, we can help you with these things in grief, but here's where you can get other help. So we're always trying to share out the resources. So I'm not sure, Jess, if that's what you wanted, but thanks for the window.
You're welcome. No, I think that there are lots of organizations like Friends of Anya, but that's a testament to the importance of specialized programming to deal with one particular niche that can have such an important impact. So we are at time, a little bit over, but it has been wonderful holding space with all of you this evening. I did put my email in the chat. Hopefully you can join us for our next session on June 29th. So some time between now and the next time we'll be together, and then we'll take a break in July because July is vacationing and all these things. So I wouldn't want to take up a summer evening in July with all of you, but you know where to find me if you need me, and I look forward to seeing you all the next time. Have a wonderful evening and try to get outside. Bye.